That is a dangerous thing. So, okay, as you all are kind of getting situated, let me just kind of give you a couple of pieces of information. On what is boy, can't even think what day it is. On Monday, I made accessible the PowerPoint presentation via Moodle, and so it had in it the writing assignment. Not everybody emailed me their answer to that. So if you still have not answered the writing assignment from Monday, make sure you get on Moodle, look at the PowerPoint for Chapter 8, about halfway down. We'll have the writing assignment. Probably what I'll do today is I'll probably shoot an email out with a writing assignment. It'll be on the slides still in Moodle, but that way it may be easier for people to see it, and so they can respond. And again, just send me all of your responses via email. I've got about half the class here. I hope everyone's doing okay. I was talking with somebody this morning. We're all still trying to adjust as new information comes in. So to say it continues to be a bit of a whirlwind, that's an understatement for all of us. We're kind of all doing what we can with it. So get my PowerPoint pulled up here real quick. Yeah, it's better, except it's not starting with the devotional. Sorry, I have to put on my glasses so I can actually see what's going on. There we go. So today's devotional, you can see it is a big, long passage that I'm not going to read in its entirety. I would encourage you to read it. This is somewhat familiar passage if you've been in church at all most in your life. So the thing that I want to point out are two pieces here. Paul's writing, but essentially he's writing the words that Jesus spoke. And at in that first paragraph, it says, "For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself." I don't remember if I said it Monday or not. What we're dealing with here is incredibly upsetting, but at the same time, this is probably one of the greatest opportunities that we will have as Christians to be able to show to the world what it means to live for Christ. We can't help but being affected by things, but the world reacts and responds really out of their emotions. If we react or respond, shouldn't say react, if we respond out of love, then we really can begin to draw people to Christ by the way we treat each other during this time. There are many opportunities to do good things for one another, to show love to one another. And so I would highly encourage each of you to not get caught up in what is happening to me, but to really look around and to see who is in need, who can I help out today. Ask God when you start your day to make the opportunities you have to share His love with others so evident that you won't miss it day in, day out. Because then, as you look down further into the passage here, where it gets to the fruit of the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace. And right now, there doesn't seem to be a lot of peace in a lot of people's lives. And again, a lot of uncertainty doesn't create peace. But knowing that God is in control, living out our Christian walk actually contributes to our own sense of peace and comfort and contentment, which Paul talks about in Philippians. So again, I challenge you to look for opportunities to serve others, and in doing so, leaning on Christ, that will bring peace during this time of great upheaval. So as we shift back into memories, hopefully you all remember that on Monday we were talking about memory, and there's three main components. There's encoding memories, there's storage of memories, and there's retrieval of memories. And so this is the last piece of encoding. So encoding is getting the information in. How do we do that? And so we covered sensory information and how we need to pay attention to that, which then allows it to go into short-term working memory. But Craik and Tulving really came up with this idea of what kinds of things help information get encoded better into our memory. And so they looked at taking a word, and if they just capitalize the word, that actually helps encode information better than if the word wasn't capitalized. If we create some type of either mnemonic device, or in this case, create a rhyme with something. So we're trying to remember the word train, and so we think of words that it rhymes with, like brain. That helps even more, and you can see that on the graph down below. But the best way to create a strong encoding strategy is to look for meaning, or what makes it meaningful. And so when you think about something you want to remember, but you put it in context with something. So again, I don't know why you would, but if you wanted to remember the word gun, if you thought about it in the context of a sentence where you can picture in your mind the action happening. So the girl put the gun on the table, then you can see below semantics, adding semantics that allow for kind of context and putting in meaning is the best way to help encode information. So right now, when you're trying to learn the idea of encoding information, literally picture your brain and think about taking that word encoding and it literally being put into a picture of your brain, and think about encoding in a sense of that picture word, and that will help you remember things better. It'll help move information, especially from the short-term to long-term memory, where we can retrieve information much better. Now, one of the big questions about when we're looking at brains is, where are memories stored? Well, there's really no one spot in your brain where memories are stored. So if you watch the movie Inside Out, you know, you've seen the little guy grabbing the little memory balls and stick them in the vacuum tube, and they get sucked up into your conscience. That's really not what's going on in our brain. We don't have a place where memories are stored and we tap into that place for them to come back up. Our memories really are kind of stored across areas of our brain. And we know this when we look at what kinds of things impact our ability to remember things. So last time we talked about explicit and implicit memories. Explicit memories typically tend to be impacted by things like amnesia, our age, use of alcohol, which helps us understand that our hippocampus is a very, very important component in learning, or in remembering explicit memories. And in order for the hippocampus to work well, sleep is a really, really important thing. You probably hopefully, remember that over the course of this semester so far, a couple of times I've talked about how important sleeping is for many different things. Sleep is key in helping us learn and remember information. What's fascinating is that our implicit memories, they're not affected by the same things. So people that have amnesia can still operate, still do things they've always done. So they could still get in a car and drive. They could still play the piano. It's also not affected by age or by alcohol. Now, alcohol will slow reactions down, um, but they're not affected. So even things like Alzheimer's disease, which can impact individuals' ability to remember information, what oftentimes you'll find is someone with severe Alzheimer's, if they've played the piano their whole life, they may not be able to tell you their name, but they can sit down at a piano and play songs that they've played their entire life because implicit memories are not impacted by things like Alzheimer's. Because implicit memories, the areas of the brain that seem to be most important to that are the cerebellum and the basal ganglia, especially in the brain stem, which makes sense because coordination and those things, that's what those areas of the brain really, really help control. So again, our memories aren't consolidated in a single area, but they seem to be spread out kind of across our brain, and different areas of the brain help in memory storage for different types. We also understand storage by looking at doing a lot of animal research. So the picture there is a sea snail. Sea snails have roughly about 20,000 neurons, which if you remember right, we have billions. So sea snails' brains are a little easier to research and to look at because there's fewer neurons. And what we've found out from research on the brain is that memories actually result in structural changes. And so our brain physiologically changes, adapts, grows, develops because of our memories. And so the more that we are engaged in learning something, the more that those areas of our brain will change. And so the neurons become more efficient. So think about it like learning a new language. The more you learn a word or say a word, what's happening is the areas of your brain that you're engaging, the neurons are firing, and the more they fire, the more efficient they become. They create new neural networks and strengthen networks that already happen. So the more we think about something, the stronger that our brain will work to help us remember that, which also then it's really key in determining what it is we allow ourselves to think about, because the more we view something or think about something, then the stronger our brain will kind of attach to those things, and the easier it is to think about that. This plays a huge role in things like addiction treatment, because individuals now not only physiologically may be addicted to a substance or a behavior, they oftentimes think about it so much that their brain strengthens that memory of it, and it's like we can almost create our own realities at times. We also know that stress hormones play a huge role in memory. And so most of our memories are triggered by more intense emotional experiences. So if I ask you to describe, let's say, your second grade year, And I said, I want you to start with day 1 of 2nd grade and tell me everything that happened that entire year. There is no way in the world you could tell me everything um, unless you had one of the rare gifts and curses of having that. I can't even think of the name of it. The memory that you can remember every single detail.
Memory.
I'm sorry, what was it, Tasha?
Photographic memory.
Thank you. Yes. Most of us don't have that. And so what we could do, though, is we could describe events that happened during our 2nd grade year that most likely were highly emotional. So when let's say your mom showed up on your birthday and surprised the class with cupcakes, or your best friend in 2nd grade told you they couldn't be your friend anymore. Those are the types of things you would remember because of the hormonal changes that the emotions triggered. And the area of our brain, if you remember right, it's in the limbic system, that's the emotional seat of our brain, and that's where memories really are kind of formed with, like, the hippocampus. And so it makes sense that stronger emotional experiences will help create memories. And that also helps us understand that how we treat things like PTSD for people not only have a memory of an event, but when they remember the event, they experience it again and again and again. Flashbulb memories are usually very, very vivid, and usually are of things that happen that again trigger those high emotions, and they are momentous to the individual. Now, here's the interesting thing. It does not have to be an accurate memory of something. If you think you remember something, and if it was momentous, then your memory will be your reality, even if it's not what actually happened. I don't remember if I mentioned this before, but I have a memory of my family being in White Sands, New Mexico, with the lizards that would change colors. I don't know if they're actual chameleons, but I have a memory of us standing beside the car and my sister having one of those lizards right here on her shoulder. The problem is when my family went there, I was probably too young to actually remember that, but it's a picture, it's a flashbulb that I remember in my head, but it's probably developed from my family talking about the event rather than me actually remembering the event. But it still created this flashbulb memory. I can still picture that in my head, even though I don't know if it's accurate or not. And again, our synapses change, our neural networks strengthen if things happen over and over, and it happens more quickly next time. So it's this self-reinforcing kind of system that happens in our brain. Here's just a few examples of potential flashbulb memories that people might have. Of course, most of you weren't around when number 5 happened. President Reagan was shot, but that was one of those, my parents remember when President Kennedy was shot. I'm gonna have to update a lot of these because you guys are way too young to remember most of them. But they're just examples, again, of what potentially could be flashbulb memories. And so I was a senior in high school when the Challenger disaster happened. And my memory of that is a little different than other people just because of where I was, the things going on in my life. So even though society as a whole we'll kind of share memories. Not all memories are going to be exactly the same. So, encoding, storage, and now retrieval. Remember we talked about the 3 R's: recall, recognition, relearning. Recall is just on its own. Recognition is I give you some options, and you have to look at the options to remember. Relearning just means if I've learned something once, later on I come back to it, I can relearn it much quicker. Well, that also plays into then retrieval. Most of our memories that we can retrieve have been seated in our long-term memory. Our long-term memory is limitless. So Hermann Ebbinghaus is one of the main researchers on long-term memory. And basically, we can't, there's no limit to our ability to remember things. So it's not like if you study and learn, all the things for Gen Psych, there's no room left for you to learn, things from your history class. All the information you get from all your classes, you have the ability to learn and remember those if you're encoding them into your long-term memory. But if we don't continue to use memories, things that we learn, you can see this forgetting curve that happens. So, what was that? Is that a week ago? You guys took exam number 2. So if today, if I gave you a quiz over classical conditioning, chances are good you would not do near as well on it today than you did a week ago on it, because over the course of the past week, you probably have not really thought about it a whole lot. So what you remember about it, you can see that decline in what we remember. We forget things over time. And the longer we go without thinking about something, without bringing that information back up and consciously using it, the more we will forget over time. Does that make sense to everybody? Head nods, good. If we want to access memories, there are certain things that help us to remember. One of them is called priming. And so I think on day 1 of our class, I told you if you want to learn some information and you want to remember it, study in our classroom. Now, obviously that can't happen now. But if you came to that, our big lecture hall classroom, and if you sat in there and you studied Gen Psych when we weren't in class, that actually would help prime those memories to come back when you sat in there for the exam. Or you could actually do that even if you weren't physically in the classroom, thinking about it in context. So as you studied, you pictured yourself in the room, you pictured the people beside you in class, or if you studied together with the people that you sat in class with, you've created this context to help you bring information back up from your long-term memory. Moods are probably one of the best retrieval cues that we have. Information that we've learned, when we have the same kind of mood, it is much easier to remember it. So I'll give you a perfect example of this. So my wife and I occasionally get a little irritated with each other. I know it's probably hard to imagine somebody getting irritated with me, but stick with me here for a second. When we're irritated with each other, it's amazing how easy it is to remember other times we've been irritated with each other. It is amazing how difficult it is to remember when we weren't irritated with each other, because the mood that we have and that irritation helps to trigger memories of when we had that exact same mood. So the converse is the same. When things are going really well with us, it's easy to remember when things have gone well. And it's hard to remember when we were irritated with each other. So our mood is a huge trigger of bringing memories in into our consciousness. So it works with any relationship. It works with learning information from a class. So understanding our moods and what mood we're in when we're learning, and hopefully addressing moods can actually impact us as we try and learn and remember information. Another thing that makes a huge difference in remembering is where the information is located. So you can see on this graph, you can see two lines. If I gave you a list of 12 words and asked you to remember them and to repeat them after me, that orange line shows how likely you would be to remember each of those 12 words. So the last 3 or 4 words that I said would be the easiest to remember. The first couple of words I said would be the kind of the next easiest to remember, but those middle words that I said would be extraordinarily difficult to remember. Now the blue line shows if I gave you a list of 12 words, but then I didn't ask you to repeat them or give them back to me immediately. If there was a time gap, you can see that we're more likely to remember the first couple of words that were given or the first couple of bits of information than any others. And so usually what happens is someone who wants you to remember something important oftentimes will tell you what they're going to talk about what they're going to talk about, and then tell you what they talked about. Because those pieces of information on the ends, you're more likely to remember, and that will help you remember the content across the middle. It's one of the reasons why I have you do a writing assignment at the end of each class, is because I know right now, halfway through class, that a lot of this information is going to be harder to remember. So I want to give you things at the end that help reinforce that learning in the middle. I'm actually going to skip a slide just because it's the one with the pennies. Most people, if you ask them which is the correct penny, a lot of people have trouble remembering even what a penny looks like, even though most of us have looked at pennies our entire life. This is just another example of if you don't use it, you lose it. So storage decay over time. I think I talked about this in terms of my experience speaking Spanish or studying Spanish when I was in college. So I want to get to things that impact our ability to remember. So this is Shader's 7 sins of memory failure, which is easy for me to say, right? We've kind of talked about some of these already. Not paying attention creates an encoding failure. The storage over time, if we don't use it, we lose it. Sometimes there are things that block our ability to either store information or our ability to retrieve information. So sometimes sickness, diseases, those things can actually impact our ability to access or store information. I touched on distortion a few minutes ago. And I said that we all remember big things, but we all remember different, just a shade differently. And so sometimes memories can be distorted because of what's called misattribution. And so we confuse the source of the information. Occasionally I'll say, do you remember when so-and-so said this? And other people will look at me like, I don't think they ever said that. And I'm like, I'm sure they were the one that told me. But who said something has an impact on how important we think it is, or how we see it sometimes. We also have a problem because we are suggestible. And we kind of talked about this in hypnosis. If you're listening to your particular political candidate that you agree with, then it is much easier for you to remember and to lock onto what they are saying than if you're listening to your opponent's political belief. And so, because we are suggestible from what source we get things, that actually can help create misinformation, or again, maybe just a little different perspective on things, which then ties into number 6, which is bias. We typically tend to remember things we want to, are motivated to, and we don't things we aren't motivated for. So I don't know how many students have said, do I need to remember this for the exam? I'm never going to say yes or no on that, because I know if I say yes, then they'll focus on that bit of information, but other things I haven't said yes to, they may not be likely to remember. But if I say no, they're not going to study it at all. And of course, in psychology, everything's important. So I want you to learn it all. The last thing here is what we call intrusions. Some individuals have memories they wish they didn't have, and some of them are so strong that it interferes with their ability to learn or to remember other things. I met with a student this morning who has some very obsessive thoughts, and they're very intrusive. And they were talking about how it impacts their ability to focus and do other things in life. And that's an example of this intrusion. And so learning how to deal with intrusive thoughts for a lot of people can be incredibly important. Okay, I'm going to skip down to a couple other bits of information because it looks like we have about 5 minutes left. The Loftus study illustrates how easy it is for our memories to be impacted. And this shows how easy it is to be impacted by a single word. And so the study had 2 groups of students watch a film of a car accident. Afterwards, they were asked a question to estimate how fast the car was going. And you can see the 2 questions about how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other versus how fast were the cars going when they hit each other. The difference between smashed and hit impacted how fast students thought the cars were going, how much damage happened to the cars, how much, for example, how much glass was shattered and spread. And you can see from the 2 pictures, the top one illustrates students who were asked how fast were they going when they hit each other. The bottom one, how fast they were going when they smashed into each other. So again, really shows our susceptibility and the impact on our memory by sometimes just the verbiage that can be used in the questions that we ask. I don't have a ton of time to go into this. I usually spend a fair amount of time on repressed memories because it's a big question. Are they real? Are they not real? And you can read through this slide itself. The reality is, forgetting traumatic events is usually very, very unlikely. I'm not going to say it's not possible. But several years ago, there was a big push of individuals who remembered being abused as children and bring about lawsuits and things. And it created all kinds of problems, not just for the person who remembered it, but obviously for those who were accused of it. And I'm not saying that repressed memories don't come back at some point. I'm not saying that injustices don't happen to people. But again, if you look at the chapter, the very first thing in the chapter gives an example of how a memory isn't always necessarily accurate, even a very, very traumatic memory. So I think there's a responsibility on all of us to make sure that what we're remembering, how accurate is that if we're going to act on it. I shared these with you day one of class. I'm not going to go through them again. They're just ideas to help you remember more. We've touched on a lot of them. Again, not just that first day of class, but through these. But that really kind of wraps up roughly this chapter on memory. We've got about 2 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions about anything we covered, either, goodness, it's Wednesday, isn't it? Monday or Wednesday on this chapter? Okay. Well, then that wraps it up. Again, I'm going to shoot out the writing assignment via email to everybody. Just respond to that email. And if you've not responded to the writing assignment from Monday's class, please get that to me as soon as possible. We'll plan on doing this again on Friday, and it seemed to work a little bit better today than it did last time. Hopefully next time will go just as well. So if you do think of questions or anything later, again, email's the best way to communicate with me. I hope everybody is safe, taking care of themselves, and I hope you have a good couple of days, and we'll see you on Friday.
I have a question real quick.
Oh, sure, yeah, go right ahead.
If we want to see our exams, is there a way that we can do that?
I will have to figure that out. Shoot me an email. I think I can scan them. I'll see. I'll do my best to figure out how to do it, okay?
Okay.
I also have a question.
Sure.
I did my writing assignment. I sent it to you before you actually send the writing assignment thing
Okay.
out to everyone. The subject should say writing assignment.
Okay. If I received that email, then you should have gotten credit for it. Shoot me an email and just say remember to send my writing assignment if you would, please. Okay.
Could you say that again? I didn't catch you.
Sorry. Yeah. Just shoot me an email. Remind me to look up and make sure I got yours.
Okay.